we'll begin. I'll tell you how I'm doing because I'm a very happy man. I found an Añejo Shark, which is very hard to find. Very, very, as far as domestic cigars go, one of the hardest ones to find.
What's that run per unit, Mike?
They're not that expensive, which is the beauty of it. The Añejo Shark is rare, but unlike most of the Fuente cigars, they don't actually try to charge you like $50. You know, the Fuente family, they're great marketers, and they'll do, you know, the God of Fire or the Don Carlos. They're very, very smart. Carlito.
They even have an Ernest Hemingway cigar.
Yeah, they're beautiful. They're the best marketers ever. Carlito Fuentes is an inspiration of mine in terms of marketing. I think they had a documentary, a short film they did. This is how ahead of the time. Let's just talk about Carlito Fuentes and why he's an amazing man. He's older now, but when I got into cigars 10, 15 years ago, they got me, and I didn't have much money at the time. I was probably still in law school, and they got me to buy an Opus X, like silver in a glass tube, and it was like $30, and it was
right.
It was actually an amazing cigar, don't get me wrong, but it came with its own propaganda video, a DVD on the Fuentes, and they came up with this and the logos for the Opus X. And it was such an engrossing experience that I forever fell in love with the Fuente brand of cigars. And domestic cigars, I generally only smoke three, Padron, Fuente, and Avo. Davidoff sometimes, but I've been a Fuente guy since. And the Añejo is the Opus X. As you know, the three parts of a cigar: filler, binder, wrapper. And the Añejo has a filler, and the binder is the same tobacco as the Opus X, but the wrapper is a dark Connecticut shade-grown wrapper. It's a beautiful cigar. It's aged in cognac. I don't know if we can zoom in and you can just get.
That's fantastic. Yeah,
the texture. Nice. Yeah, they're super hard to find, and they're not like the usual. Like usually, this is the one rare cigar the Fuentes don't really. I don't want to use the word gouge, but you can get these for $12 to $14 if you find the right shop, and it does not taste like the $12 to $14 cigar. It really is the absolute.
What's the full name of that? Because I know Fuente likes to give their cigars about 18 names.
Well, this one's simple. This is So Arturo Fuente Añejo Reserva Extra Viejo number 77, because it has the square gauge, so it's a 77 gauge cigar. But real aficionados will know that this is the Añejo Shark. They're very hard to find. If anybody's watching and they can find these for about $12 a box or whatever, buy the box. Send them to us, and we'll love you forever as friends.
That's right. We'll go on the beach or something. Go back to the Ritz-Carlton and smoke a few of those.
They really are a great cigar.
Where we did our Pappy Van Winkle episode.
Is that ever going to air?
You know what? That just went live yesterday.
Perfect.
Yeah, so we're up and running on that. I think our guys are working on some snippets for us, so we'll get those out there. But
the episode is up fully now.
Episode is up. Yes. Yeah.
Excellent.
So going back to Fuente, they do have an excellent marketing program. I just saw a cigar actually that made me, I don't know, it kind of reminded me of the way that Fuente markets their stuff, because this dovetails with what we did on our last episode with the Pappy Van Winkle. So these guys, and I'm not even sure which manufacturer it was, but somebody went out and they purchased Pappy Van Winkle barrels, and now they're aging the tobacco inside the Pappy Van Winkle barrel. Yep. And then they're wrapping it in, like some kind of shaving or something from the barrel itself. And they're a Pappy Van Winkle cigar. Now, I don't know if those are out yet. I think that was a coming soon type deal, but you talk about great marketing and dovetailing with something else that's an iconic brand. And Fuente is certainly good. I mentioned that they have that Ernest Hemingway cigar, which I think is one of their best sellers, but a great way to grab some market share by dovetailing, or what do they call that in the social media world? Newsjacking.
Well, they have the Hemingway, which does well. They're regular off the shelf ones. The Chateau Fuente family cigars are good. And that, what I love about the Fuente family is I love this marketing thing, because for me, it's always the same way. They have a very inexpensive entry point. You can buy a good Fuente cigar for, not in California because of the tobacco tax, but you can buy a good Fuente cigar $6-7 most parts of the country.
Sure.
In California, $8-9. You get a Chateau Fuente, and they're very, very good cigars. But if you really want to go to the super premium, they have super premium experiences too, and that's always been sort of my marketing perspective is, hey, I got an ebook, $10. I have podcasts. People are listening to this free. We have events. Right. Events might be $300, $1,000. There's all multi-entry points, but there's always an entryway, and then there's always a premium experience. And I think the biggest mistake most people make, even though I hate the term creator, is they don't think of a platinum experience. They only think of, because here you can, and you can speak to this yourself, but I was told this years ago and I didn't believe it, and it's true. It takes as much time to sell something for $5 as it does for $500. Same process, objection, everything's the same. And most people, they spend all their time thinking about selling their lowest value good. And you need to think more about, how can I create a platinum good and find the people who really want that platinum experience. And something I wish I'd have learned, not when I was 41. I wish I'd have learned that when I was 31.
Well, I'll tell you, that's interesting, because one of the things, it's somewhat of a passion of mine, is I do, obviously I love the real estate space. I personally am not, I got completely burnt out on the brokerage space of being a real estate agent, a real grind. But I actually have a client who I'm coaching right now that is a very successful realtor. And I go in and help them set up processes and teams and things like that. But, one of these discussions I was just having with this lady was, it takes you just as long here in the San Francisco Bay Area, it takes you just as long to sell a $190,000 condo. Now, yes, we still have condos about an hour outside of San Francisco that sell for $190,000, but it takes her just as long and just as much paperwork and just as much headache, if not more headache, to sell a $190,000 condo as a $2.3 million house. It's the same paperwork. It's the same process. It's the same hand-holding, everything. So, why would you market, or why would you try to go on the low end and try to make it up in volume when you can do, a handful of fewer transactions, give better customer service, and, have a more enjoyable life? So there's a lot of truth to that. It is just as difficult to sell a $500 ticket as it is a $150 ticket. And you know that probably better than anyone with the amount of events that you do and have put on.
Yeah, there's the Fuentes family. They have it down. And then of course, now what, I don't say complicated it, but when you want to build your skills on the lower, if you're selling, you want to sell low dollar widgets, because the margin of error of blowing it is a lot less. So if you're selling smaller things and you make a mistake, you might lose out $500, or the mistakes are a lot less expensive. And then you learn your processes and work your way up the food chain. But most people never make that jump. And even me, I wouldn't say I was reluctant, but I just didn't know these things, because it's very hard to learn these things. I was at Barnes & Noble. One of my favorite activities is to walk around and look at books and just find a book cover that stands out, right? I've looked at tens of thousands of book covers. That's why mine are so good. Because
now, are you doing this for entertainment, or is this actually like a learning experience for future books that you're gonna do to see what pops in your mind?
Luckily for me, there's no disconnect between what entertains me and what I enjoy and what I do. And just like this podcast, I like talking to you. If I didn't like talking to you, I wouldn't do the podcast, right? It's very nice, but it took a long time for me to get to this point. And you learn a lot from book covers, and you want a book, because everything I do, like Guerrilla Mindset is art. Audacity, the book cover is art. Hoax movie, the covers is art. You could hang this up in your wall, on the wall. And so I like to look at book covers, but then I was looking for just a really good business book that talks about what we talk about just doesn't really exist. I wish it did. I've read so many of them. Most of them are, how to be a better employee or high level process or even some kind of management tips. But there's no book on, like, I want a book. I'm a grinder, right?
Right.
I don't need somebody to give me a pep talk. It's going to be okay, Sonny. A lot of people, especially young men these days, are kind of lost, and I don't want to denigrate their experience, but I don't need that. I just need a book like, okay, I'm a grinder. Give me a checklist. What do I need to do? And unfortunately,
well, I think, that's interesting you bring that up. I'm going to tell you personally, that's always been a struggle of mine with my employees is I am a type A personality. I want to throw out, do this, do this, do this, do this. Okay. Here's the 5 things to do. Right. And not everybody learns like that. But you're right on. If there was a book that just had, hey, go here, do this, go here, do this. You got to do this, go there, do this, do that. And you really don't have that. You've got a lot of fluff, a lot of make me feel good, a lot of motivation, and a lot of things. And not everybody learns like that. But I think you and I are very similar in that way. We just want the nuts and bolts. And, if you want a friend, then, go pet a dog.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need a book to say, I don't need a book to tell me, hey, who moved my cheese, right? Or, management challenge. I just want a book that says, like, if I wanted to get into real estate, I would want a book to say, here's how many people you're going to have to call to make a sale. Here's what your conversion rate. Here's what a sales process is. Here's 10 checklists. Here's the 10 most common objections that they're going to raise. Here's why people don't buy. Here's when to abandon a client. Da, 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 da. And I'd be like, okay, just upload the information to my brain, and then I'll go do it. And by the way, that's the crowd that I usually attract in all the podcasts and stuff. People want to like argue with me. What about, I'm like, you just do it or don't do it. Just
right.
Do it or don't do
No,
it.
I mean, that's where you have to get to, right? It's either take the advice and do the stuff or don't do the stuff, right? I mean, because it's not for everybody. And that's always been a struggle for me.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not going to spend a half an hour arguing with people. I'm like, okay, bro, I have a half an hour. I could go talk to 50,000 people right now doing something else. And you want to argue with me, nitpick some little thing. So I just get rid of and that probably goes back to my marketing style too, which is that if you're not willing to just put in the work and do the work, and you want to argue and act like we don't have hours. It's not a college class. We don't have, you're back in college, you're sitting around or whatever, wasting time, smoking weed or whatever. We don't have that kind of time, man. You're either a young man in a hurry or a young woman in a hurry, or just get away, go read someone else. They'll tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah. I threw something up on my Instagram last night, in talking about, that typical thing we all hear, hey, the 5, people that you hang out with, blah, blah, blah. And, if you're hanging out with the 5 broke guys, then, you're going to be the number 6 broke guy and on and on. And, and hey, if you're smoking weed, then whatever. And the picture, I was working on something with our Mindset Squared podcast, and I poured myself a little tiny pour of the Pappy Van Winkle, and I was enjoying that and working through some podcast stuff. And so, at the top, I've got a picture, that kind of resonates with me personally, right? But the thing below, I wrote that whole thing geared towards my 17 and 18-year-old sons. And I wanted them to see that and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I shouldn't be doing that. Actually, one of my sons, shot me a message and said, Dad, I'm not smoking weed. And I said, I'm not saying you are. But, if you're with those 5 people, that's going to be the thing. And so it's a little nuts and bolts. And, that goes back to some people resonate with that and some don't, right?
Yeah, no, I actually had an epiphany before I knew anything before I had a system like I do now. But we would go to the trailer and we would all smoke weed, which is a very cool thing. There was one of the guys who he had, like a little plot of land, and there was just I don't know if not like a trailer park, but just a trailer, camping trailer or something. And we just all go out there and like smoke weed. And it was like kind of fun. I did that for, I don't know, a month or two.
Right.
And then one day I looked around and everybody was just high. And I thought, this is the rest of my life, man, just smoking weed, getting high. And then I went home and I never talked to them again. But it was very emotionally painful for me. This is what people don't realize is I'm not a robot. It was emotionally painful for me to not be around those people. But I just realized, hey, this is going to be my life, just smoking weed all the time, sitting around doing that. And is that really where you want to be? And people don't think, oh, no, I'll be different. No, you won't be different. the people you're hanging around, or you get caught up. People don't realize how easy to get caught up. You hang out with weed heads. Well, weed heads, maybe one of them has a gun one day, and you're driving and you get pulled over, and the cops stop and they find a gun in the car seat. Well, guess what? You're all getting arrested for that. And
Right.
constructive possessions, it's called. Now you better find a lawyer. It just leads you down a certain path. And that's why it's always better to just cut people out. Absolutely. Because even if that one thing isn't bad, you have to just know that you're going to get caught up, because dumb people or irresponsible people do irresponsible things, and that carries over through all areas of their lives.
You know, this is probably one of the most interesting pieces of information I think I've ever heard from you, is what you just said right now, and resonates with me to a level where I'm almost teary-eyed now, because I had the exact same experience in my life. I had these guys that I was friends with in high school, big crew of guys, and awesome growing up with them and everything. And one day, you know, a couple of years out of high school, we're sitting in a cruddy apartment in, you know, outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri. Everybody's getting high and drinking Budweiser. And I went up to 7-Eleven to go get a candy bar, because I was never into weed and stuff. And I realized, holy shit, I'm going to be in this apartment 18 years from now or 17 years from now. And I was trying to tell these guys that, and this is what's so fascinating, is you and I didn't even talk, we've never talked about this before, ever. But I remember telling these guys, hey man, I want to open up a business. I want to, you know, I'm thinking about buying a small apartment building. I'm going to live in one of the units, and, you know, I want to open up a restaurant, and I want to do, you know, I want to do this. I want to build all this stuff. And I literally, I put this on my Instagram post last night, completely aimed at my two children, my two boys. I have 3 kids, but this was aimed at the boys, was don't share big dreams with small thinkers. And I remember going to the 7-Eleven, and I'm getting a candy bar, getting something to drink, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, am I going to be here in 18 years, you know, smoking weed, drinking a Budweiser with these guys, and, you know, basically working at the pizza restaurant down the street and living in the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri? Is that really what I want for my life? And at that point, it totally hit me. And I literally cut those guys out of my life. And I remember for weeks after that being like crying, because I mean, I had no friends. I eliminated everyone from my life. Everybody thought I was a fucking jackass, right? And it's interesting. I had a conversation with a friend of mine a day or two ago, and I was telling him a story about this one guy that I grew up with that, you know, still works in the same place that he did when we were, you know, 16, 17 years old. And, you know, that's great if that's what makes you happy. It wasn't what made me personally happy, and I certainly don't want that for my 2 boys. But yeah, your experience is exactly parallel to my experience. I had the exact same experience, and and it was painful. I don't know if it was painful for you, but it was really painful for me at that time.
Oh, sure. It was emotionally devastating. I would just stay home on Friday night, right, like a loser. Because back then you realize, your high school mentality is if you're staying home on a Friday, that's losers. Because when you have friends, that's when you go out and everything else. So
Right.
I just stayed home, and they would call me up, and I was like, nah, man, I can't come out. I'm sick. I'm not feeling well. I always had some kind of, you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not going to say, sorry, you guys aren't really going the direction that I want to go. I didn't have the language to communicate. I have language to communicate these things now. So I'm much more, now I could just say, hey, I love what you guys are doing. I think it's great for you guys. For me, my life is just going in a different direction. And, I hope we see each other down the road. Right.
Yeah.
But you're high school, you don't know. You just, I can't come out tonight. I'm sick. I'm grounded, or, some kind of.
Well, that's what happened to me. I just started making up all the excuses, lying to these guys about why I couldn't go do it. And, eventually what happens, you're the guy they start talking about because you're, the dickhead that didn't come, and you're no fun. And, we're going out to do, the same thing we did the past 42, Friday nights and Thursday nights and Tuesday nights also. And all of a sudden you're the bad guy. And, I don't know, man, it was really, really, really painful for me. That was one of as far as socially, it was one of the hardest things. It's one of those things I still think about from time to time. I was really tight with this crew, and sometimes you got to go in a different direction, and that's hard. That's really hard.
Yeah, the pain of going away, and especially when you're in high school, because a teenager, there's all kinds of things happening biologically. You're meant to bond. You're meant to have a tribe. You're meant to have. This is all evolution. So it
Right.
takes a tremendous amount of pain, really, to go against your DNA and your cultural programming, because cultural programming is especially acute. Where why are you home alone by yourself on a Saturday? Even I don't know if you got this, but my parents would kind of like peer pressure me, even like, oh, don't you have any friends? Da da da
Right.
da da. Right, like you're
Oh
some
yeah,
kind
I remember being back at home, and my mom, I'd be over at my mom's house, my mom and dad's house, eating something out of their fridge, on a Saturday after this happened, and I'm just hanging out there because I needed some company. Right? I had an apartment, but I'm hanging out. They're like, they're asking, well, we're going out to dinner now. Don't you have some friends to go call or hang out with? And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, this just, it was hard, and I didn't want to be totally honest with my parents about where I was. And I like you, I didn't have the language capacity or maybe even the mental capacity at that point in my life to be able to communicate that with, my peer group and my parents. And it's like one of those things, you feel it, but you're not sure how to do that. I think that's a really important lesson for younger people out there is, here's two guys right here who are successful in their own right that went through some really, really tough stuff. And sometimes it's not easy. I mean, you have to feel that pain, like, who's that? Grant Cardone says that, right? You gotta feel the pain, or you gotta, embrace the pain to get through the process, if you will. And it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard to do that. And boy, did I struggle with that in my early 20s. I mean, I'm glad I did it then because, I'll tell you, I was dwelling on this last night when I was writing this post directed at my son. I've got someone in my family, I'm not going to get into any specifics, but someone in my family had a medical issue, and I had to help out with that because there were portions of that weren't covered by insurance. So anyway, I have, there were some medical issues that weren't covered by insurance, and it was to the tune of about $140,000. And this has been something that I've had to cover 2 months ago. Now I'm in a situation where I simply wrote a check for that, right? And it's because somebody that I dearly, dearly love that needed help. And I was thinking back to that decision I made in that apartment or at that 7-Eleven, all those years ago, that had I have had my children, would I have been able to provide that help if I didn't make that decision back then? And that really tore at me because the only reason that I was able to help was because of those sacrifices that I had made many years ago, and in a lot of trial and tribulation. But there's a lot to be said for that, because if you're able to financially help somebody, and maybe it doesn't even, in the ultimate, at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't help them, but at least you're able to do it. You know what I mean? And give them a shot that maybe if I didn't make those sacrifices, I certainly wouldn't be able to write that kind of check.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be. It's just factually you wouldn't be able to. There's no,
right.
There's no maybe if so. Just you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah,
reality.
And so it's really tough, But I think that's another great lesson for people listening at any age, especially if you're a young guy and you can preserve capital and pursue passions and things like that and make some money. And God forbid, maybe you don't have insurance and you fall down and you break your knee and it's $30,000. You don't have to hobble around for 2 years or something, but, or maybe, your best friend gets addicted to cocaine and you've got to pay for rehab for, 2 months or something. You're able to do that. Or maybe your mom and dad, something happens and you're able to step in and help them. There's a lot to be said for that. And it's, there's really, for me personally, and not everybody's like this, but for me personally, it just gives me a lot of security to work really hard and to do those things, because I can provide for people if it comes to that. And
Yeah, and that's two different lines of discussion. One is the choices you have to make money, and you will have to make choices. You don't have, and even now I'm learning as now with two daughters, I'm just, I don't know if short with people is the right answer, but I've always been pretty ruthless in terms of, hey, you live your life, I'll live mine. If your life isn't on the frequency mine is, that's fine, but go live it, away from me. And now with two daughters, like, you just don't have the time. Everything you're doing has to be super focused and leveraged on a certain way, leveraged towards your
right.
goals. And people don't think of it that way. If you're spending time with all these people just goofing off or whatever, you're not going to have the time that you need to make other moves in your life. And that's why I hate there's this genre of self-help where rich men in their 50s tell everybody not to get rich. I really hate those people because first of all, they won't give their money back. So clearly they're just liars. And two is they had to sacrifice to make that. And they're telling people, oh, you don't have to sacrifice. You can just do whatever you want to do. No, you can't. You just can't. It's impossible to do. You're going to have to make emotional sacrifices. You're going to have to cut people out of your life. You may have to cut family out of your life. And if you're not willing to make those sacrifices, that's fine, but you're not going to get your life to the level it could be. The end, full stop. There's no way around that rule.
Right. And that's the typical guru thing, right? That's the guys that are selling the dream. But yeah, you got to make those sacrifices. And there were many years where I would argue, with my significant other, and, hey, why are you putting in so much time at the office, or why are you doing this, or why are you doing this? And I'll tell you, none of that at that time. I couldn't make the argument. And then all of a sudden it came full circle over the past few months where, my ex came to me and just said, hey, you know what, for all those things that you gave up all those years ago, I'm so grateful that we're in the situation that we're in, that we're able to do what we could do. And
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes decades to realize that sacrifice was worth it. And I only just realized that within the past few months.
Well, and it's funny bringing that up too, because I never talk about my wife only because I'm such a prominent public figure and people spin that into what it's not. But yeah, we do kind of have those conversations where, like me, I spend a ton of time at work and a ton of time with my daughters. Like Cyber works with me and hangs out with me and everything else. But, a lot of times, the women, they need that time, just that couples time or whatever. And I told her the other day, I'm like, hey, look, if you want to, we can go move to Phoenix, Arizona right now, and I will never have to work another day in my life. And then she was like, well, I was like, no. Like, it was a sincere offer. I said, look, we can sincerely right now move to Phoenix, and I will never have to work ever again in my life. And then that sort of puts it into perspective for them. But there's always, when you're making money, there's always that thing where the spouse is usually going to be like, well, you're working so much and everything else, but you have to, and first for me, I guess it is because I love doing it. Right. So that's one thing, I guess, that I'm blessed and that I enjoy the work that I do, but it's hours and hours. I wish the number one thing I wish people knew about me when they listen to my podcast, I wish they knew how hard I worked, and not only how hard I worked to this day, but how hard I was working. I'm a loser today compared to how I was in my early 20s. And I really wish they understood how much work you really have to do.
Yeah, it is. It's never ending, and there are a lot of sacrifices to be made. And it's never easy because you have to make those choices, I've got this client that I've got to go deal with. And, unfortunately, Max, my son, I want to be at your soccer game, and I've been to the 10 other soccer games, but I'm not going to be able to be at this soccer game. I've got to go to New York for this meeting or whatever. And, those things just happen. I mean, it's just part of life, right? I mean, I wish that I could, live in Bali and, enjoy, a tiki hut over the water or whatever. And, whatever, but it's not reality. And it certainly wasn't reality 15 or 20 years ago when I had no money. I mean, it's just was not an option,
Yeah. And they don't always, people don't always appreciate that, where you can't, it's one of the paradoxes of life, which is you can't live the life you live if you don't put in the hours you're putting in. I remember I'd watch these reality shows where, thank God this is not my situation. I have a great wife. There was a situation where the doctor was, this is like 10 years ago, whatever, right? Because I don't watch reality TV now. This is back when I was with somebody who was much, not really on the level that I needed. And the wife would be like, wah, wah, wah. Why are you working so much, husband? But they just bought like a new mansion for like $5 or $10 million or something. And a lot of men find themselves in that situation where they try to placate their wives, and the wife says, I want this bigger thing. And then they buy this bigger thing. And then the wife is like, well, why are you working so hard? It's like, well, you got to buy this bigger thing, right?
Right.
And they don't always appreciate that. And fortunately, that's not our situation, as we both know. But I'm sure there are some guys, at least listening in, they're probably divorced, listening in, or like, yeah, they remember that situation where you really have to work. But on the flip side is, I wish there were easy money like there isn't. I grew up poor. It was terrible. I'm sure that, one day my kids will say my dad worked a lot, but my daughter, she goes to art, just things, the life my daughter lives, and we're not even, blowing money or whatever, is incomprehensible. I think about this every day when I'm with her.
Well, you were saying that you grew up in a household with 6 people, an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of St. Louis, Missouri, in a very, very moderate home, a 1-bathroom, 3-bedroom home or something, that was probably worth $40,000 or $50,000, with 6 people. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable place to come from where you are today, and it really gives you some perspective. I have never lived. I shouldn't say when I was growing up I didn't live in that situation. I have been dead broke though, and that's not a fun place to be.
I've been dead broke too. It's worse as a kid because as an adult you think you can figure it out, but. I'm with my daughter. I remember when I was a little kid, I was thinking about this the other day. My dad was like, oh, I'm going to take us all to Walmart and get us presents. And he bought us like pillows, right? So for me, like 9, 10 years old, like they're going to buy new pillows for $7. And that's,
we both laugh now, but I mean, really it's sad,
Yeah, no, it was. But so I'm with my daughter, I'm reading her books, and I look around, I'm like, all the stuffed animals were on a bean bag that I bought for her because when she was 6 months old, she couldn't sleep, and the bean bag was like $500. And Shauna actually doesn't really, she's kind of she's thrifty. So the opposite of spendthrift. She was like, you're not going to buy this for her. And I'm like, look, man, I want my daughter, she likes it. It's a bean bag thing. But the advantages that she has, she'll never appreciate because she didn't ever go without them. Just the idea that, okay, I'm reading to you. You have all these new books. You're reading books. When I was a kid, we read the Bible. That was the only kids book I ever had, which ironically probably is why I'm so smart, because I had to, read all this King James Version stuff. And that's a great way to increase your verbal intelligence and verbal IQ. But I didn't have the kind of life that my daughter already has. And really, not ironically, but I misuse the word ironic all the time. I think a lot of people do. It makes me not more left-leaning, but I think about all the advantages my daughter has that I just didn't have. And you realize how rigged the game is from jump. From day one, the game is rigged in favor of my daughter now. It wasn't rigged for me, that's for sure. It was rigged against me, and now it's rigged for. And I think a lot about how we can even that out and try to make it a little bit more fair as a society. And I don't have any answers yet, that's for sure, though.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And that goes to that talk of privilege for different types of people, and there's arguments for or against that. I think everybody loves the underdog story of the person that comes from the $40,000 house, with 6 people living in it, or the story of the person that comes from an inner city ghetto and rises to the heights of becoming a general or some type of political figure or a senator or something like that, or the CEO of a corporation. I mean, those stories are fantastic, and the United States does certainly provide that opportunity. And I think a lot of what you and I are talking about is that There's massive sacrifice, though, to get that. It's not easy because the system is, in a lot of ways, rigged against you. In many ways, not just, not having money, but there's a lot of stress, that comes from not having money too. How do you get from point A to point B if, your car's a pile of crap, right? And how do you get, your kid into this better school, and how do if you don't have money? So there's all those things to think about, but there is a path, and I don't know about other countries, but certainly here in the United States, if you're willing to put in many, and then a few more hard years of work, you can change where you are. You can change your station in life. But you're right. It is, the system is certainly tilted one way or another.
Yeah, and it is worse than other, and that's the whole point. That's why I always, and we keep this apolitical, but that's why I'm always been pro-capitalism, because without capitalism, so if in a capitalist society it's rigged against you, yes. Without capitalism, it's rigged against you and there's no way out. So at least you have a way out. At least you have
right. If you live in North Korea, right, you're assigned a job, you do that job. If you don't do the job, you get shot and you're taken to the gulag, right? One of those two. And there is no upward mobility unless you happen to be married to somebody who's in the, the reigning, dear leaders, hierarchy or whatever. But you're right. Yeah, you have that in a capitalistic society. And I think the problem is that a lot of folks, a lot of young people especially, they look at it and it's a long ladder to climb to get to success. But it is possible. But you got to do
long, and you're still climbing it. And I still have days where, as when you put money in your businesses, suddenly you're broke again, right? That's the nobody ever talks about that, where you finally, I can't speak to you personally, but me, I do well, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to invest in all these businesses, but then suddenly you don't have any liquidity, and then you have like a cash flow thing. So
believe me, being in the real estate space, I know all about that. Right. I'll have money burning a hole in my pocket,
right?
Millions of dollars in capital ready to deploy, and then talk to me 3 weeks later, and I'm like, I don't know if we should go to that nice of a restaurant or not, So
yeah, I actually was like, Shauna, there are too many Amazon boxes coming in, He's like, they're double bath. I'm like, it's a bad month, man. It's been a bad month. You got to.
That's right.
Like, but I thought you did all the. I'm like, I know, but I don't have the money. Right? I don't have.
Yeah.
I'm like, we're not poor. We're illiquid. She's like, what do you mean?
Yes.
I'm like, yeah, I'm like, we're not poor, but we are illiquid.
We just tell her to listen to the podcast. You're going to have to listen to Mike and Mike talk about this.
Right.
She certainly didn't want to talk about that when we went to dinner the other night,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
She can listen to the podcast, right? And you can explain those differences. If she cares to, she probably does not, which is.
Thankfully, which is why I love her. If she cared to listen to it, she'd be a different person. And then rather than balance my lunacy, she would be a lunatic too, and it would just be two lunatics running around screaming at each other all day. So I'm glad she's not listening to this podcast.
Too funny. All right. So one last question here. When we're done here, I'm actually gonna head to the cigar shop because I'm gonna pick up some cigars for this event that I'm holding this weekend. And what do you recommend that I get that'll be a crowd pleaser?
Okay, great question. So if you're bringing cigars for people who are not regular cigar smokers,
that's what this will be. Then
the Avo Classic in the tube, they come in a beige colored tube. They're mild to medium. It's good quality tobacco, and then you can't go wrong. If you gave people who don't smoke cigars like a Añejo Shark, they'd be in the corner. The nicotine, they wouldn't be able to handle it. It'd be a little bit too much.
Right.
But you can't go wrong with the Avo Classic in the tube. It's clean. Plus, it's a very because cigars it's an experience. So they unscrew the top of the tube and they pull it out. There's a cedar strip there, and there's more of an aesthetic and kinesiological experience with the cigar. And that's what I like when we have our cigar nights in. We're rotating around, but when we have them, that's what I always buy. I always buy 10 or 15 of those. And then I get a few Chateau Fuentes, which is a little bit more heavier tobacco. And then I'll get a few Padron 1964 Maduros, which is it's going to be a kick in the butt for people who aren't used to it. And that's kind of the range that you would want to use.
Yeah, you always have a real nice selection at those events. Real nice cigar selection. I mean, considering that it's always held at a different cigar shop, right? But it's you always have a real nice selection there for those, no doubt. And I was thinking something. Next time you're up in Napa Valley, we should do an episode that kind of talks about this a little bit. And I think people would be really interested in this. And that's find one of these high-end winemakers here in Napa Valley that does some of this marketing that you're talking about, where they're taking, say, a normal bottle of wine that's maybe a $40 or $50 Cabernet, Napa Cabernet, and they're able to label that and market that differently to get that price point way up. It'd probably be really interesting to talk to somebody like that.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. I love to think about it, but we should definitely do that. And Carlito Fuente, I tell you, man, the smartest thing he ever did was he made that movie about himself and the company brand. I think everybody should have their own movie about themselves. It's actually, to me, it's surprising that most people don't.
Well, there'll be a Cernovich movie, I'm sure, soon.
One day we'll do one.
You haven't lived enough, Mike. You got to live more before you can do the movie.
Well, there's actually a big, there's a book coming out that has a bunch of stuff about me.
Are you lighting that cigar up right now?
Of course.
Okay. Well, might as well. I mean, smoke them if you got them, right? Well, you got to have the you got to live maybe a few more years to have the Cernovich movie, because there's a lot to the story that's yet to be told.
There's a lot of life left, that's for sure.
That's a lot of life left. You probably want to do that a few years before you're gone, right? You want to get the full story. Unless you do a sequel, you can do sequels, like second and third episodes and stuff.
Well, Pumping Iron was Arnold's big coming out movie, and he was 28 when that hit.
Well, and Prince was pretty young when they did Purple Rain.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that launches the personal brand too, like it did for Prince.
Yeah, if you can carry it. The bigger question is less whether you've done enough and more along can you carry a film by yourself. I
remember watching Purple Rain thinking, who is Prince? Mm-hmm. I remember thinking that when it was out. I was a teenager at the time. I remember thinking I never heard before that, right? I mean, maybe I had heard Little Red Corvette, but I didn't know it was Prince, But then they came out with Purple Rain, and suddenly everybody knows who Prince is.
Yeah, I could have carried a film. Because I've been doing my big focus in 2019 has been only on my businesses. So I've been doing less stuff, but making sure it's more highly leveraged. So I could have carried a film circa 2017 when I was doing the college talks and the White House reporting and the running and gunning kind of stuff.
Right.
I could have, and that was when a film crew actually they're doing a big Netflix special actually on media personalities, and they follow me. They got footage that I'm envious of, and they don't even license it. So
they won't let you have it.
No, I could have carried a film 2015 to 17, 2018, maybe 2019. Most of what I'm doing is what viewers would consider boring. Supply chain, distribution issues, launching new stuff. It isn't that sexy stuff. Here's me at the White House and here's me doing all this other stuff, because all that stuff that I did that was really sexy, it doesn't pay the bills, to put it that way.
Right. I was going to say you're in a mode now where you're starting to get things in line to monetize, right? And as everybody likes to say, in the parlance of our times, you're wanting to monetize. So.
Well, I'm launching a big skincare line, and that's my big project for the year. And that there's not really a story there. Oh, here I am on the phone. Here I am, testing creams. Here I am doing this or that. That isn't the kind of thing that an audience would be captivated by. But my life in 2015 to 17, it was unbelievable. It was captivating. And in hindsight, I should have had the people who did Hoaxed, I should have had them just follow me and all that. The footage was amazing. And,
right.
It didn't happen. But by the way, that's fine. I'm happy just being a boring guy and running businesses that are actually profitable rather than, oh, wow, look at me, I'm this famous guy or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's I'm struggling a little bit with my social media stuff. Since we started the podcast, you would coach me to, hey, you got to get out there and do some of the social media stuff. So I've got the Instagram account and I've got the Twitter account and all that stuff. And it's a little hard to kind of find your way in that. And there's things like I'm experiencing or I do in life, and I'm like, oh, that would have been a really cool thing to put out there. I think people would have liked that, but you just you're not capturing that in the moment. But I'm trying to do more of that. So it's you're definitely right about that. There's great stuff out there.
Well, you'll find your stride, and because you have to find your voice. There's a lot to it, which is you got to find your stride, you got to find your voice, you got to find your message, you got to find the market fit. What do you have that people want? That overlap, and I think this is a good the brand that we're kind of building. They're not, that's a weird way of putting it, but there really isn't luxury experiences for people of all political backgrounds where you can just hang out. Like our cigar nights, for example, we do these cigar nights. There's just so many smart people, all walks of life. Nobody cares if you voted for or against. Nobody even talks about politics, which is the beauty of it. But if somebody slips up and goes, oh, I'm a Republican or whatever, nobody cares. People are like, okay, well, good for you, whatever. And there isn't, and that's why we're doing this thing together. There isn't that right now. That's a huge, huge demand for people who just want to hang out, talk about life, do things without the Trump mania or anti-Trump mania or Trump hysteria or whatever the case is. And that's the vision for the pod. That's what we talked about when doing the podcast too, was, we want to keep it no pro, no anti-Trump, no Clinton, no Obama, no anything. Yeah. And there isn't anybody doing that, where you just hang out, talk about this stuff, and don't let that lunacy from the outside world get into this.
Yeah, and there is some real interesting stuff there without getting into the politics and stuff, which people really get a lot out of. And hey, the podcast has been doing fantastic. I mean, it's for the short time that we've been doing it, folks have really enjoyed it. And
for a new podcast, it's doing well. Yeah, it's getting its own little following, and that's what you learn too about starting your new stuff. Is it's like an S curve. You get your little thing here for a year, and then you really kind of take off. And people forget Joe Rogan's podcast was doing 30,000 views maybe 5 years ago, because and then you hit that S curve, and that's what most people.
I think one of the things. And maybe we could talk about this on maybe next week on our next recording. But there's a guy out there called DC Drano. You had given him a shout out, and he talked about Instagram in building how to build a following and whatnot, which is really interesting. But one of the things that I think that you and I are doing with the podcast that applies not necessarily to Instagram, but just is the consistency. We've been really, really good about doing it every single week at the same time. And I think that's part of it is getting it out there and recording it and just being real consistent with, instead of, hey, let's do it this time. And then, you don't do anything for 6 weeks. And then, hey, let's do 3 of them. And, you and I have been really, really good about that level of consistency, which applies to anything in life, really. I mean, I found that with my real estate business and everything else. If I don't send out postcards, if I don't make phone calls, if I don't, talk to sellers, if I don't talk to buyers, if I don't talk to other investors and all these things on a regular basis, and you tell yourself, I'll make it up next week, I'll call it, and it doesn't happen.
Cracks.
And,
we should.
And your quality's not as good.
No, we can do a whole episode of that. Cracks. Like my mantra for this year was quit letting things fall through the cracks. My whole life was like 2018. And a lot of it's excusable because of blah, blah, blah. But things would fall through the cracks, missed opportunities. And in your real estate, missed deal flow. Oh, you had a deal. Why isn't this done? Even me with the skincare thing, I was taught, we were supposed to be launched 4 months ago. But one thing through another fell through the cracks. So this year, I'm just super disciplined, super focused. Everything is about nothing falling through the cracks this year. And that's, but that's the fun of it too, is you're always leveling up in life if you keep going.
Right. Yeah, you just keep building on prior successes and adding things and trying different businesses and different things and seeing what takes. And, I think you had mentioned in a prior podcast that you're going to try 4, 5, 6 things out there. And one of them, will go over the fences, but you're probably going to have, 3, 4, 5 swings that don't really go anywhere. Maybe you hit a single, and that's okay, right? You just build on the next thing. And sometimes when you get into a business, let's say a guy goes out and he starts I don't know, a landscape business, and he figures out, well, you know what, I don't really like cutting grass and I'm not making a ton of money in that, but man, these people keep paying me a lot of money to do this landscape design in their front yard. Maybe there's something to that. And all of a sudden, business A leads you to business B, and business B turns into be a home run. So, I always advise people, you just got to get out there and make it happen and put in your best effort, and things flow. Life flows, and success flows to you if you're really putting in the time and the effort to do the best you can do at whatever it is at the moment.
Perfect, man. Well, always a pleasure. And I see the new podcast is up, the Pappy Van Winkle thing. If that's on YouTube too, I'll make sure to go download that and promote
Yes, Yamazaki 18 versus Pappy Van Winkle 20.
Incredible. All right, thanks, guys.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Mike.